I can mute it, can I?
Please take your seats. Welcome back. Hope you enjoyed your coffee and coffee breaks and good conversation. I certainly did. Due to the Norwegian Brazilian Innovation Business and Science Week, I will have to take off to go to Brasilia to lead a roundtable discussion on Arctic and Antarctic issues. So we are really sort of spreading our wings here and using the full span of Norwegian know-how and interests. Wherever they meet Brazilian, we will try to be there. So, and after that, there is a kickoff reception in the embassy. So there will be a few things going on in Brasilia as well. So Rune Andersen here, he will be heading the question and answer session. Also asking questions if there are none from the ranks here, but I'm sure there will be one, be some. And unless I would like to be here when he asks questions to the Research Council, for example. That would be interesting. But before that, there is a keynote speaker, and we are very happy to welcome David Cameron. He is originally from Australia, but he's been living in Norway for 25 years, but he kept his name. He is a center coordinator, Center for Scalable Data Access in the oil and gas domain. Very much welcome to take the floor, David. Yes.
Thank you. So the microphone works, I think? Yeah, good. Okay, well, as I said, my name's David Cameron. I represent the University of Oslo, where I've got a role called Centre Coordinator at what we call the SIRIUS Centre. And the talk today is about digitalisation, which, as many speakers this morning noted, is a buzzword. And one of the buzzwords which also came out of it is that data is the new oil. The Economist magazine poses that as a proposition. And that also has some implications of people saying that we're going to replace the old industrial, natural resources-based economy with something based on data as new oil. So let's ask the issue, can we mix this new oil of data with the old oil of oil? And yeah. Okay, a message from my sponsors. I represent something called the SIRIUS Centre for scalable data access in the oil and gas domain. It's what's called a Centre for Research-Based Innovation, which is a constellation that has been tried out in lots of places in the world, where you get financing from a consortium of industrial partners, together with finance from a university and from a Research Council of Norway. This particular consortium brings together 11 industrial partners, of which you can recognise Statoil, Schlumberger, IBM, DNV, GL as leading world-class companies in this area. It also brings together an infrastructure, a grouping of Norwegian vendors around data integration and high-performance computing. Academically, it brings together the University of Oslo as host institution, the Norwegian Technical University as a participant, and a group from the computer science department at the University of Oxford as researchers. We're around about 45 affiliated researchers at the moment. We've got core funding for around 20 doctoral projects. So, what do we mean by digitalisation? I can't presume to give you a complete definition of what digitalisation is, but what I would like to do is to give you some places to go have a good read about this, and also try to apply some of the concepts that people have used to describe the digital world to what we're doing in oil and gas. So my talk today will be structured around the analysis of McAfee and Brynjolfsson from MIT, where they identify 3 factors affecting the so-called digital world. That being machines, platforms, and crowds. The other, learn to click the right way. The other thing which I think we need to think about is the other or complementary approach to digitalisation that oil companies have been using to evaluate what they're doing, which is about digital manufacturing and what's called the 4th industrial age. That's been something which is very much driven by the German clusters around the automotive industry and around heavy manufacturing, especially in a German context. And in fact, it's called Industrie 4.0, a German thing. Now, it is a set of technologies which they believe can transform heavy industry and manufacturing around things like robots, system integration, Internet of Things, simulation, additive manufacturing. So I've seen all companies approach digitalisation by saying, these are these technologies, tick, what can we do to apply these technologies? Now that's a valid approach to doing things, but I think can be often a bit short-sighted, that it becomes a push from these particular technologies into areas where they're perhaps not quite suitable. And another thing which was very, very positive for the oil and gas industry is that the World Economic Forum, you know, the people who meet in Davos every year, put down a group around digital transformation initiative for the oil and gas industry. Now, they identified 4 things which were very relevant to us, and they are a digital asset lifecycle management, the ability to build up what they call a circular collaborative ecosystem across the industry between suppliers and companies and vendors. And then I had 2 areas which are a little bit beyond my scope of competence and a bit beyond the focus here, but are very relevant if you're an integrated company which continues to have downstream and new energy assets. And that's about the ability to go into new markets in a way that have not been gone into before around energising new industries, and the ability to also contact your end customer and be part of a more flexible energy mix, which is this beyond the barrel concept. What's very positive about this is that this is something which is anchored very, very high up in our oil and gas companies. And as usual, if you get it anchored up in very high companies, you have to come with a report which says that there are going to be big rewards for this. Now, the World Economic Forum commissioned Accenture to write a report about this, and they noticed that the total headline benefits of digitalisation in the oil and gas industry was some completely unbelievable figure, like about $1.7 trillion, of which $230 billion was going to be through automation of operations, with an interesting and perhaps worrying side effect that 40,000 jobs were going to be displaced, which is a polite way of saying disappear in that area. Analytics was going to bring half $1 trillion in benefit, and a connected worker was going to give $100 billion of benefit, whilst also displacing about 80,000 workers. Now, the economic model presumably works. I'm concerned that it's good that these figures are getting attention very high up in our companies. It reminds me a bit of a paper published in 2007 by the Norwegian Oil and Gas Association, talking about something called integrated operations, which was, in a sense, part of digitalisation, where they promised a potential of $30 billion over a 10-year period. And incidentally, it was quite amusing to go back and see what assumptions went into that. They assumed an oil price of $43 a barrel when they assumed those benefits. Unfortunately, what then happened was that the oil price went up to $100 a barrel, and the industry started spending money like drunken seamen, with the result that those potential benefits were probably only realised after the oil price went back down and the industry discovered that they'd actually supported remote operations, discovered that it actually laid the foundations for digitalisation to get those benefits. So I suspect that those benefits have actually happened between 2013 and now, rather than in the 10-year period from 2007 where they were promised. So anyway, my message here is, yes, there are going to be benefits. I suspect some of the costs have been underestimated, and I suspect that the costs are going and benefits are going to occur in unexpected ways. Okay. Machines. I'm going to give you 3 slides to think about some of the things which we need to think about if we're going to responsibly digitise. And the first one is machines. I'm concerned that machine learning and artificial intelligence can often be oversold. I'm also concerned that automated systems are not sufficiently safe, reliable, or resilient. Another challenge with machine learning or statistical approaches to things is that they require huge amounts of data. Now, the oil and gas industry sits on huge amounts of data, but they're often not the types of data that you need to do machine learning type things about. So we have to keep asking, do we have the data, and is the data good enough? And very importantly, we need to be able to use machines to support work practices. I'll keep coming back to that. And what also worries me is I think a lot of our decision making about this is decided by science fiction, at least subconsciously. You hear robots, machine learning, the age of machines, you immediately come back to, if you're old enough to be an old wineskin like me, back to Star Wars and C-3PO and those type of things. And we have this vision that the type of intelligence you can get by putting an actor into a robot suit is a type of intelligence you're going to get from machines. And we're probably 50, 60, 70 years away from that if it is ever going to be possible. However, people are able to sell that because it fits very good into our presuppositions. And I seem to be incapable of making us go the right way. Okay, another question about platforms. McAfee and Brynjolfsson talk about the platforms, the Apple Music platform, Facebook platform, Snapchat, and say that they have, and Amazon, these platforms have transformed large areas of what we can call consumer-facing industry. Retailing, communication, media. Every company who deals with data in oil and gas is now going around saying, yes, we will build a platform on the principle that if you have the platform, you become the company that controls the information and you can start making monopoly rents out of that. Fortunately or unfortunately, we're in a situation where I don't believe that the petroleum industry can and should converge on one platform. What you're going to see is a situation where each oil company creates a local platform, which then has to collaborate with special purpose platforms supplied by their vendors. So you're going to have a system here where you'll have to draw connections between all these islands. Because your automation company sits on information, so your ABBs and Kongsbergs and Schneiders, because they own the instrumentation data, have a need to provide a platform. Your General Electric is trying to create a sort of one ring to rule the world type platform. That's very useful, but it's not going to be, I don't believe any oil company is going to say, I'm going to throw all my data over into any of these platforms. SAP's trying to use their data. Certification agencies like the MVGL are trying to use their data. And service companies like Schlumberger are necessarily providing platforms. So there's very important legal and collaboration issues about that. As I said, I don't believe that there's going to be one platform in the oil and gas industry, but we're going to have to make all these platforms collaborate. So when Petrobras goes into a collaboration with Statoil, you're going to have an IT integration issue, and you're also going to then have that integration issue across to your various vendor platforms in specific areas. You've got to be able to negotiate sovereignty, ownership, and integrity. You've got to make security work. And there's a great deal of work in computer science you can do around designing these platforms and making them interoperable. The third point from Brynjolfsson and McAfee was about crowds. And that is actually a very positive area. This is about capturing a contribution of each engineer, geologist, planner, worker in an organisation. It's about opening your supply chain so you can share data and remove inefficiencies in transfer of data. It's about being able to work with vendors to co-design systems. And it's about expanding access to startups and SMEs. What's very interesting around crowds, and Brynjolfsson talks about, is that they talk about something which is called the core, which is a group of people who've always done things as it's been done and sit with a great deal of credentials, qualifications and abilities. Now I'm 52 years old and have a PhD, so I'm presumably sitting somewhere in the core. Now out there somewhere there's a crowd that is full of bright people who will work for nothing to solve all your problems. And so the dream is to get the core. The crowd is a threat to the core because the core's too competent to do anything useful. So the crowd, if they're incompetent, can do lots of interesting things. That's a bit of a story about it. But I think there's a certain grain of truth in this, in that we need to be able to open up to different groupings. And IT provides ways of doing this. And we need to build up an agile culture because the core needs to be able to maintain stability, to make sure our oil platforms don't blow up, to make sure our computer systems work day by day. But we need to be able to use new technologies to enable us to try out experiments and work on things which are going to provide benefits in 4 months instead of 5 years. And I think one thing which is very, very good to support crowds is to put in IT that enables people to do self-service access to data. So that an engineer can go in and make an ad hoc query to a lot of databases. At the moment, if you try to do that, an ad hoc query takes about 2 to 3 months to set up as a project in the IT department. So that takes too much time and too much money. So we need to be able to support self-service access. Okay, so that's what I see as being how machines, platforms, and crowds fit into oil and gas. I'd like to give you some cautions about digitalisation. And the first is that we deal with real things. We deal with real people. We deal with real rocks in the pre-salt. We deal with real oil and gas platforms which have a tendency to blow up if you treat them wrong. So we need to remember that rubbish in equals rubbish out. And even just looking at a measurement you take, this is something I did about 4 or 5 years ago, which I don't have time to go through here, but it's actually saying that if you look at a temperature in a reporting system, it has a fairly indirect relationship to the actual temperature that you're measuring on your facility. In that you've got all these steps going through from a true value, which you don't know, to a measured value, which you do know, but may not be the true value. So you've got lots of other physical things. Then you've got transmission configuration areas through layers upon layers of databases until somebody's making a decision on that value. Now that sort of thing is true throughout our industry. The other thing which is a challenge is that actually the real world is a hard place. Especially oil and gas, the real world is a hard place. It's dirty, wet, cold and hot, which are not very good places for computers. And we don't do technology qualification just for fun. We do technology qualification because we need to have these things working for 50 years. And that means that robustness, reliability and resilience is difficult and expensive. And so a good test question on this, on how ready are you for digitalisation, is to ask someone running a platform, how many control loops do you have in manual? And if you are running a land-based chemical factory, the answer is about 60% of them. And that means, well, you've got problems with your data. And you've actually got problems with actually maintaining the ability to run your facility as it is. And the things which are most likely to fail now in digitalisation are the areas where you're actually talking to the real world. We're actually trying to do something. Actuators which won't work because they're frozen. Sensors that aren't accurate enough. Sensors that aren't calibrated. Another challenge is that the classic approach to data is that data integration in the ages of digitalisation is to take all the data and put it into a specific type of database called a data lake, which I fear has a chance of turning into a data swamp on the grounds that you don't have control over what the data is and what the connections between the data implicitly are. So we need to do work around integration security, integrity maintenance and search on that. And a very important thing I think we need to do around that data is we need to be able to maintain meaning and context in that data. There's also a challenge around skills and domain knowledge. We've heard about data scientists. Apparently data scientists are going to replace the oil and gas industry when sometimes you hear them. Well, are they just statisticians with attitudes? Sometimes they get the impression that they're actually gurus. Perhaps it's just a problem that I'm an old wineskin, 52 years old, and I need to be replaced by a 35-year-old. The ideal of a data scientist is actually an expert who is simultaneously an expert on statistics, computer science, and some sort of domain knowledge. Now, that's going to be very hard to get in a single person. So my feeling is that wouldn't it be better to try to build interdisciplinary teams? And one thing I've also noticed is that a data scientist is going to come into a set of tools which are based on assumptions that models are random, models are non-parametric, and are very complex. But we deal with physical things. So I believe that there's a great deal of fruitfulness in getting people to work together with the data scientists to do hybrid modelling, so that we enforce some degree of meaning on statistical methods, that we use statistical methods for what statistical methods are good for, coping with uncertainty. And finally, EMP is an inherently social process. It's about people being creative and checking with each other. It's about interpretation, judgment, experience, dialogue, mutual responsibility and teamwork. That's not stuff you're going to get out of a computer. And so we need to be always aware of that we're digitalising. It's about enabling groups of people to make considered decisions about what they're doing. And that's how they found Johan Sverdrup. It was a great deal of good geophysical processing, better imaging, but it was also a great deal of people printing things out, standing around having a talk about things and running on hunches. Okay, in the end, I'll try to explain on how this hits academia by describing a little bit about how SIRIUS works. SIRIUS is an interesting organisation in that it's a computer science department working with the oil and gas industry, which means we're actually 2 jumps away from the people who've got real problems. It's much easier to be a petroleum engineering department or a chemical engineering department and work with the industry because you're only 1 jump away from operational problems. And so we have a gap between computer scientists who are publishing in very, very mathematical journals. We also got IT vendor companies who've got IT products which they want to put into solutions, but they've got to jump over a bridge to take a piece of Hadoop database or something like that and turn it into a solution for oil and gas. And then we have industrial end users with their motivations trying to get problems. So we've spent a lot of time trying to find ways to bridge these gaps. One of the ways to do that is employ people like me, who's a chemical engineer from industry, back into the university trying to do this sort of translation between disciplines. And the computer science we need to do this is interdisciplinary. And that means we need to do projects which won't just fit into a certain box in computer science. We need to bring together, in our case, 7 areas which are distinct areas in computer science into projects to address digitalisation in the oil and gas industry. So metaphor we like is it's a palette that you need to produce a painting of. And we also need friends with problems. So we've naturally got our partners. Statoil and Schlumberger have been invaluable in coming up with business use cases for us to address. We also have an alliance and organised work with Geoscience at the University of Oslo. The reason for doing that is that Statoil said, look, we can't use a great deal of our time teaching you computer scientists geosciences. We suggest that you talk to your colleagues in the next building so that you know enough geoscience to do this. We're also working on Earth observation, and we're also working into the European Union. And the approach we need to do is that digitalisation, as it's currently sold, is all about very quick, agile results. Now, you don't get quick, agile results from a PhD. But that's okay, because we're actually dealing with complicated long-term problems, so we need to continue to do our PhDs. But how do we then get our PhDs up into things which are demonstrably good for the industry? We're doing that by setting up a fundamental program of PhD projects, which will run for the next 6 years, but then pop up from those prototyping and pilot projects to solve specific problems on a short time span where the people working on it are postdocs. So I'll finish off, if I've got 3 to 4 minutes, with 3 examples of what we're doing at the moment. The first is a project called Optique, which is about digitalisation of geoscience, and we hope also over the next couple of years that it can also lead to the digitalisation of national data repositories. And this is a dream question from a colleague in geosciences. He wants at some point a student in science be able to ask, I want all the gamma ray logs from wells that penetrate this particular deposit with porosities within this limit, within this geographical area. And then press a button and be able to go across the Norwegian repository, the British repository, the Dutch repository, the French repository, and the German repository to find that information in an ad hoc call. We've demonstrated that you can do that across Statoil's databases, and that the approach is feasible and reduces a workflow which previously took 3 months down to about 15 minutes. We've now taken a swing back out into the university to do work to demonstrate we can take our own medicine, but what we also want to do is give a message to people who run national data repositories in that they need to digitalise now. Otherwise, they'll be delivering 1995 technology to a digital oil and gas industry in 2025. Around operations, we're going to be looking at 3 things. We're going to be looking at planning, we're going to be looking at digital twins, and we're going to be looking at requirements. Around planning, we've discovered that the methods we use to analyse the behaviour of computer programs on cloud systems and on distributed computing systems can be applied pretty directly with a little bit of interpretation and reinterpretation to simulation and analysis of the consistency of plans in logistics, commissioning and maintenance. So this example is a little demonstrator we've put together, which has taken the shipping out of the supply base for the southern North Sea for Statoil, that we are then able to take that information, simulate it, and then present it in ways that integrate data from multiple databases in a way that the people in that particular department had not seen before. The other area which is very important is around, that we're working on, is around requirements. Large engineering projects involve transfers of large amounts of paper. Often that paper is very repetitive. Often that paper is very difficult to interpret. Often that paper is actually inconsistent with itself, in that companies come with requirements, standard practices, and then transfer them to the EPC companies. You then fulfill those requirements, and then you get a lot of transfer of paper backwards and forwards. Now, requirements are something that you can express very well as a database object, as a logical statement. And we're actually been working with a company in Norway called Eyeball to demonstrate that you can set up the sentences in all their standards governing a certain area around piping as logical statements in the computer. And that means that, in principle, you can share your requirements as a database instead of as lots and lots of documents, so that you can use those requirements to check engineering's calculations, check that validation has been done, and reduce your costs by 20%. Okay, that was a fairly quick and probably a little bit too hectic view of how I see digitalisation. I'd like to summarise that it's, I'm a bit worried sometimes that a lot of the talk about it is sort of, well, I think also what was said about the new wine and the new wineskins, that everybody likes to believe that they're in the absolute new age. And I'm now old enough to have been through 2 or 3 new ages. We had the IT boom in the 2000s, and what was constant there was that we sat there looking at another group of people who'd been much better at selling themselves, saying, why are they earning double what we're earning as engineers? So I believe that digitalisation is a really important thing. Most important thing is our CEOs actually have it on their criteria. So let's go make it into an opportunity to make sure that we use computers sensibly and responsibly in all the areas we're doing. And keep computers in your multi-phase flow, in your logistics, because it's you who own the problems. Projects that are just trying to search for problems or put technologies in for the sake of it won't work and aren't wanted. Muito obrigado.
Thank you, David, for bringing us beyond the buzzword of digitalization. We will have our own parallel session tomorrow about digitalization, so I guess there will be a lot to discuss there. What? And then we have questionnaire time. And Denise is already asking for some questions. We can have now, we have some minutes for questions, both to David and to all of us that already have been on the presentations. And we have a little bit earlier than we go off at I think it's 1:15. We have the lunch. And we have also a couple of minutes given to SINTEF before we go for lunch, for they have an announcement. And I think that will be kind of a good announcement, because I saw in this year's conference, we had this, new members in the group. And SINTEF was kind of committing themselves both from Brazil and from Norway. So they have a kind of a, seems to have a ground on both countries. So maybe there will be something about that later. So, and then Denise?
Dr. Cameron, I have read an article in Nature magazine a couple of weeks ago, and he mentioned the new currency, which is pub coins. And I would like to know your vision about it. That you say that the researcher publishes, and then he goes to his group and say, well, if you publish in another periodic, you can mention my article, and then the mentioning of my article is going to increase my judgment on the councils that support financially, and then Nature published this terminology, pub coins.
Okay. I haven't heard of that, but I'm still wired. I haven't heard of that specific thing, but it sounds like it's a digitalization of how things seem to work in academia, actually, as it is now. So perhaps it's a good idea. Perhaps, given the digitalization challenges on the journal publishers and the advent of open publication, it's something worth trying out. I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
David, just interested on your views on platforms. Because I agree with you. I think it's one of the biggest issues that we face in the oil and gas industry to adopt digitization, because you know, every week we have another vendor that comes with their own platform who wants to take your data away and put it in California or somewhere else. Yeah. In Brazil, we have very specific rules about data. That's one thing. But also control of data is a big issue for us. And I think it's the thing that puts us off moving forward into a digital world more than anything else. And I was just wondering, is there any sort of industry forums that are presently talking about this topic in more detail? Because every vendor believes it's not a problem when you talk to them, but in reality it's a huge issue.
I think the problem is starting to be addressed in Norway by the Concraft initiative, the competitive ability initiative in Norway, where you're looking at how do you open up data. I agree that it's an area which is going to strand on legal and contractual things rather than technical things, but it's also going to strand on the fact that most platforms are competent to do one or two things, and so we're always going to have 3 to 4 platforms talking together.
And then Morten Dahlen has asked for the word, the question.
Yeah, one question to you about platforms again. And you know that over the past 30 years there has been a fight between standardization and flexibility. Yeah. How do you see that fight now for the next 10 years when it comes to what do you need to standardize and how should you do it in order to keep flexibility in the systems?
Yeah, I would argue now that we actually need standardization to enable flexibility. Now that means we're going to have to change the type of standardization we've had. A lot of the standardization has got itself a bad name because you've had abstract discussions on how many pumps can you get to dance on the end of a pin through the various standardization efforts. What we need is a pragmatic standardization. You go in and do something before the standard's in place, knowing that you may have to fix it later, but you spin that out into the standards operations. Now, what we did with Optique was about that. It was saying we were in an area where there were lots of standards, we used what we could, but then we cut it down to what was necessary to solve a problem. But we really need to get those standards because we're not going to give the flexibility we need to open up these systems and give us flexibility on platforms.
Very good presentation. My name is Cássio. I work to Petrobras Research Development Center. Since I work in an operator, usually we have some pressure to evaluate the benefits of our research and development efforts. We have showed some numbers here about the potential benefits of these technologies. Is it possible to evaluate the benefits? How could do foreseeing the benefits in the future of these technologies?
That's a very good question. Accenture used a very large-scale macroeconomic model where they took various areas of the industry, assumed that there was a certain turnover, said that if we do this, we believe you can get 4% improvement of this, 3% improvement in that. The challenge we have in operations is that everything we do around digitalization has always got another thing being done in operations which can also take a bit of the credit. That's been a problem for the last 50 years. So I was going around selling process optimization into Norsk Hydro in the mid-90s with you can improve production by 2% and improve uptime by 5%. Now, those figures were done on the basis of licking a finger and sticking them in the air. But we had to do it. And we knew, we knew in our gut that it was actually going to do that sort of thing. And it's amazing, we now go out 25 years later and people in operations still say, oh yes, and you can improve your effectiveness by 2%. So the figures are still there. I'm not sure where they're from, but you've got that constant challenge of what we're doing is always affected by something else. And we do the digitalization project and then the oil price rises $15 a barrel and it's completely irrelevant.
Good morning. My name is Marcelo. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Campinas. Considering the relationship between the industry and the universities, which changes do you expect the universities to undergo, considering this undergoing process of digitalization on the industry?
I think that there is a need to update the statistics that you teach to engineers, for example, so that we are able to move the statistics away from a classical design of experiments type statistics into something that is more related to dealing with streams of data and dealing with uncertainty in the decisions you make as an engineer. I would also make a very self-interested plea that there needs to be a career path for people who spent 30 years in industry who suddenly find themselves back in a university. Because that's an area where I believe that there's a great deal of benefit in having translators who are able to try to talk both languages, have enough academic integrity to talk to the academics, but also then have the ability to translate across to the industry. So I think innovation positions in universities is in a very important area. Yeah, but that one's very self-interested. Other than that, I believe that we need to do a campaign in Norway around saying that manufacturing industry, heavy industry, natural resources, oil and gas is actually important to us. But it's not going to disappear in the next 30 years.
Yeah, one last question. Karen?
Okay. So I think you just answered my think you just answered my question, but I want to make sure. So you talked about the crowds and the core,
Yeah.
and I was wondering who's the communicator between them. And I just want to make sure that you were saying someone who has 30 years of practice in industry and going back to academia would be sort of the ideal.
Yeah. Actually, it was very interesting because Brynjolfsson talked about the fact that the crowd can contain lots of competence that the core doesn't have. But then the example they gave was a case from genomics, where the people who were doing genomics had a problem where they'd come up across to a problem where they couldn't solve it. Their algorithms were good, but not good enough. Now, to make a crowd work, they then had to translate that problem into an algorithmic problem so that computer scientists could understand that. And so they were saying, Brynjolfsson was saying, look, all these people who know nothing about genomics are helping these genomics people do things. But then their example said, but the genomics people actually had to spend a year and a half translating the data into computer science language so that you could then get the computer scientists to work on the problem. And so it's going to be harder work than people believe by just saying, oh, crowds are great.
Okay, then Morten has a question or comment on the question.
Yeah, there was a very good question from you there. How will university change as an effect of digitization? And I think one of the things we have we are starting to do and grasping into at the universities is how education is being changed based on digitization. It's not giving geoscientists or bioscientists ICT courses, but integrating that understanding more into the biosciences and geosciences and pharmacy and whatever. And how that is done is quite complicated. It's not only teaching the kids or the students programming. They have to go into some kind of an algorithmic thinking where programming is a tool to put the algorithms into work and so on. And then comes, for example, you have to change statistics in order to be understood by a geoscientist and a bioscientist. And I think we are at the edge now of changing our education quite dramatically worldwide, taking digitization into account, but not, of course, changing the curriculum in biosciences, geosciences, and so on. So this is, we are in a very important time now to do that. So, so just a comment to your good question over there.
Okay, I think we are
late for lunch.
Ready for lunch. There is no question to start oil and Peterbras Knuckle solution, but that can be taken, I think, in 2 days during lunch or in technical sessions and wherever. The room here will be closed until 2, so you can leave your stuff here. You have to get a ticket, and then we go over to Rascal as we did last year. So wasn't here last year. Just follow the crowd to Rascal, and we have lunch there. And then before we leave, we have somebody from SINTEF going to make an announcement. I think, yeah, he's back. Jack is back. Made an announcement.
Well, dear audience, almost 3 years back, SINTEF was established here in Rio in late 2010, was officially opened early 2011. And along the way, we have faced much of the problems that I think most companies has had here in Brazil. It has been ups and downs. By the end of 2014, the downs were so heavily hurting that we decided to restructure our operation here and to make a controlled winding down. However, the process has been a quite good process. We have done the process with the help of inventory management. They have done a great job. And we are now left with a group of excellent deal with inventory management and the leader of the group, Joao Canedo. So SINTEF has transferred all the formal responsibilities and obligations to the local people here in Rio. So from today, ISDB, Flowtech are continuing on their own. SINTEF is linking up with the company through a cooperation agreement, and we will explore the opportunities here in Brazil via that cooperation agreement. So we will still be a part of the research domain or the research environment here in Rio, but we'll do that through ISTB Flowtech. Joao, are you here in this room? There is, so come down, so you can, so they can see your face. And if you can scroll down, I don't know, is it possible to scroll down a bit here? Joao visited us in Norway a couple of weeks. There you are, yeah. Okay, stop. And he already there, we shook hands with the Executive Vice President of SINTEF Materials Chemistry. So, Joao, would you add some few words now? Yeah. You will be the manager of the group now, so okay. Congratulations, Joao.
Yeah, thank you, Jack. It has been some ups and downs along the way, but we are very happy that we have reached an agreement with SINTEF, and we will continue to address the R&D challenges in Brazil through ISTB and the cooperation agreement with SINTEF. So to our university partners, to our also partner companies and clients, we will continue to fulfill our commitments, present ones and the future ones, so can bring on new projects as well. So we're happy to address the challenges. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Good news. Yes. Jack is smiling. He didn't do that last time I saw him here in Rio, so now it's much better. We say I think we like that SINTEF is smiling in Brazil, so thank you. Now we go for lunch. We're back here at 2 o'clock, and you get your food tickets at the reception with Anna there.